really want to thank everybody for coming, and I know it's a Saturday afternoon and there's basketball games and kids have things going on, but I appreciate the attendance. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a PowerPoint, and for those of you, if you were here last night, it's very similar to the one last night, but we're going to go much quicker because there's a lot of people I want you to hear from. Several of the other parties that have been involved in this settlement process are here, and I want you to hear from them. And as much as anything, we want to hear from you at the end. So we'll go as quick as we can. It's difficult because it is very complex. There's a lot to it, and we don't want to rush by stuff that's important to people, but we also trying to be conscious of time and get things moving. So after I go for a bit, Paul's got some things he's going to address, and then we're going to bring some of the parties that have been involved, some of the agency, state and federal folks that have been involved in the process, and let you hear from them, and then we'll open it up for comments and questions. This is the side of the parties that have been involved in the process. I guess we're going to the next slide. So quite a few parties, 3 departments of the federal government, 2 states and agencies, 4 Indian tribes in the basin, 3 counties, 2 sets of groups of irrigators, commercial fishermen, and a coalition of conservation organizations. So from the beginning, you've all, I think, heard this, but this is what the Klamath Water Users Board objectives were 2.5 or 3 years ago. These haven't changed. They've been consistent. We went into the process with these as our goals, and we're going to tell you through this presentation how we think we did with those 3 things. And I just point out that there's a lot of parties involved, and every party had objectives of their own. And we didn't expect anybody else that was going to take care of these things for us, so we did it. That's how we approached it, is that we had to take care of ourselves. So I'm going to talk about the water supply. There's various components of this document: fisheries, restoration, there's tribal programs, there's county programs. I'm going to really try and focus on the water and on the power as it pertains to irrigators in the Klamath Project, and then we'll talk a little bit about the water rights and regulatory assurances too. So it would put what this would do with water. It affects Klamath Project irrigators who are contractors with the Bureau of Reclamation. It affects those that divert or get their water from Upper Klamath Lake or the Klamath River. This is most, but not all, of the irrigation districts in the Klamath Project. It would put into effect a permanent limitation on the quantity that the project diverts from those sources. That limitation is 330,000 acre-feet to 385,000 acre-feet in the wet years. And we believe that what we've done is secured an allocation that we can count on. Paul? So just for reference, this is 1961 through 2000, and these bars represent delivery or demand to the Klamath Project. And you can see we broke it out. These blue ones here are 1961 through 1985. These purple or red bars here are 1986 through 2000. And the reason we broke it out is because you can see the demand is actually a little higher in those last 15, 20 years. The average demand or delivery from 1961 to 1985 is 341,000 acre-feet. The average delivery from 1986 to 2000 is 389,000 acre-feet. So we've used more water over the last few years on average. Paul, so this line right here is 400,000 acre-feet. I think this is hard to see. This is essentially a graphic depiction of the allocation, the Klamath Project allocation. So this bar here represents 330,000 acre feet in drier years and 385,000 acre feet in the wetter years. And these circles above and below this bar represent the project demand. So what you see is this, and this graph is, I believe, goes back 1961 through 2000, so it's got all, and what you see is half of them are below that line, half of them are above that line. This allocation will be based on a March 1st 50% exceedance forecast, and what that means is, in March 1st, as early as possible, in other words, for planning purposes of farmers and project irrigators, we want to know what we're going to get, because right now, we don't know, and it changes multiple times throughout the year, and it can change right in the middle of summer. So again, on the period of record, half the years fall, we would be short under this plan. The other half of the years, we would be able to irrigate 100% of the Klamath project with surface water flows. This graph is the same thing. It represents those later years, 1986 through 2000. And what you see is, here's these points up here represent the demand in these years where the inflow is in this range here. The red indicates the last 5 years with the Bureau of Reclamation's water bank. So what you see is the water bank, by and large, has held us below that allocation in most years, the exception being 2002, which was kind of an outlier. Things were pretty dry from 2001, so that one's up there higher. But what this plan does, and what we as a community, or the irrigators in the Klamath project, are going to be tasked with doing, is figuring out how to reduce this demand to meet our supply. And we think that this proposal gives us the resources and the tools that we can live within this allocation, that an irrigator's choice will be two choices. One is to irrigate, and the second is to choose not to irrigate and be compensated for it. It's going to be difficult. It's going to take a lot of money, engineering, hydrology, to develop a plan. But what we've said is, we as a community, as water users, as irrigation districts, we want to decide how we live within that allocation. And we don't want somebody else telling us how to do that. So again, when we look at this allocation, what our board has done and what our consultants have done that we've had looking at this is, we have to be able to try and compare how this allocation stacks up against our alternatives. And when we evaluate alternatives, we have to evaluate the current biological opinions that are in place right now. They've been in place since 2002. And I will just tell you that they're not a good place to be. This summer, and again, we didn't talk a lot about this. Things worked out fine, but there were three different months, end of the months this summer, where there's a very real chance we were being shut down because of lake levels. So it's month to month, and sometimes it's day to day. We made it. We got cool weather at the right time. We got a rainstorm at the right time, but it was very close. Right now, there's a current biological assessment out from the Bureau of Reclamation. It is in the hands of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries, who will write the biological opinion. This is a reconsultation. So we have to look at what we think that biological assessment says, but then we're kind of guessing what the actual biological opinion will say. So that's one of the alternatives we've got to look into. We've got to say, hey, what are future biological opinions going to look like? And I think it's safe to say that we expect that the water bank as we know it today, and the funding for that water bank, may not be around. The other component is adjudication outcomes. There are a whole range of possibilities there. Project irrigators and others have spent a tremendous amount of time and resources in the adjudication process, and it's far from over. And then finally, I put on their political horizon. The fact of the matter is, if you're an irrigator in the Klamath Reclamation Project, you're part of a federal project that's located in 2 states, and you will be the subject of congressional oversight hearings, of an immense amount of media scrutiny, and public opinion, those kind of things. So the political horizon, we're going to have a new president in the end of this year, start of next year. We have to try to figure out what do we think that means for irrigation in the Klamath Project. So the water plan, again, shortages will occur in 50% of the years. We want to come up with a voluntary, market-driven approach in dealing with those shortages. Again, this will be developed by our communities and our irrigation districts, and it will be how do we live within that allocation in those 50% of the years where there's not enough water. What we envision is entering into agreements, well, first of all, conservation and efficiency. There's always more we can do there, and there's significant savings I think we can get in further conservation. Forbearance, conjunctive use, storage, those kind of things are all tools that will need to be evaluated when we develop our on-project plan. I think what was important to us as well, and this is, I think, worth pointing out, we didn't want to be in a position where every year from here into the future we're dependent on congressional appropriations for the funding of a water bank. So what we've said is we want to front-end load this so that the payments within the first 10 years, the money to live within this program, we have it and we're able to go out to landowners and enter into long-term or maybe permanent agreements. For example, and this is purely hypothetical, I mean, this has not been worked out, and it'll be a big job, but if we get funding up front, enough funding up front to do it right, we might go to a landowner and say in a below average year, on March 1st, we're going to know the projected inflow. It's going to be right half the time, it's going to be wrong half the time. So we may go to a landowner or have a bid process or something like that that says, how much would it take for you to take 100 acres of your 500-acre farm and not irrigate in a below average type of year? So then every year when a March 1st comes up like that, I guess you could think of this as an easement, whatever you want to call it, but it would be an agreement where when certain conditions occur, but you're going to know at March 1st, that land will not be irrigated that year. You may be entering into agreements with well owners to say, in an average year, we need you to pump X amount, and you'd enter into that agreement up front. So that's all hypothetical, but those are the kind of things that we think could work. There is a provision for an additional 10,000 acre-feet to be added to our dry year allocation, the 330. There's certain conditions that have to be met, and that would kick in. Okay, Paul. This is the funding component for the water plan as it relates to on-project. There's $2.5 million to develop a long-term sustainable plan. This is what we talked about. We're going to have a lot of experts come in. We're going to have to look at hydrology, soil profiles, all those kind of things. And also, again, I don't think I can say this enough, we didn't want to get into a situation where we're permanently downsizing. And so what we came up with was this other idea. And so we don't want any one community, Bonanza, Merrill, Malin, Tule Lake, to bear the brunt of we're going to drive the land up there every year. We, I think, are thinking of a situation where you can move things around and be flexible in how you do it. $10 million a year for 10 years to implement this program. So that's the money that you're going to go out and make agreements with well owners or with landowners to idle in certain circumstances. And there's also funding that will address the interim between now or if an agreement is approved to when it's funded. Groundwater is important. Groundwater is going to be important to us to be able to live within that allocation. There are some limitations in this plan with respect to impacts on surface flows. There's nothing in here that says we admit or agree that there's a connection, but what we've said with respect to when we develop the on-project water plan is that we will avoid adverse impacts on surface flows. And there's certain springs that are mentioned, Sucker Springs on Upper Klamath Lake, springs around J.C. Boyle, and there's quite a section on groundwater and what all that means. But we envision that groundwater will be an important element to living within our allocation in those 50% of the years where we need it. And again, from a community standpoint, right now we're pumping water every year. Since 2002, regardless of the hydrology, regardless how wet it is, we're pumping groundwater for the water bank. This plan allows us to get away from that and to more of a true conjunctive use where you're using that groundwater only in the years you need it, and it'd be on a sliding scale. The absolute driest years, that's when you're going to pump the most groundwater. The rest of the years, you have the ability for the aquifer to recharge. So first thing I need to make sure everybody understands about this is an example, and it's hypothetical, but when we talk about the plan and how it could work. So what these represent, these bars, the blue bars are years where there would be a shortage under this allocation. So you have these years here, there's no problem, we're irrigating just fine with the surface flows. Well, let's say we put a certain amount of our funds, our resources into conservation, lining canals, recirculation, whatever it might be. So now you've taken these years and you're covered by just doing conservation measures. So then you get to the next year where the demand is 370,000 acre feet, and the allocation gives us 350,000 acre feet. So we've got to come up with 20,000 acre feet. We got conservation, so you got to come up with a little bit. So in these years, you turn on the first tier of groundwater pumping, and that covers you, up to a shortage of 45,000 acre feet. Then maybe the next tier, your demand here is 388,000. The allocation is 330,000. So you got to fill up this gap. You got conservation, you got groundwater. Now maybe you're idling, 1%. I don't know what it would be, but you're idling some ground, and then that would cover this area here. Then in the driest years, where your demand is pretty high and your allocation's low, maybe that's a second tier of some more wells that come on to get us through that period of time. Okay. Water rights assurances, I'm basically going to skip this and let others address it later. Go ahead. I'll just touch on this. There are provisions in this plan for drought, and there's particular provisions for the term extreme drought is used. In this plan, and for the purposes of us planning for it in the future, 1992 and 1994 are the examples of what would be an extreme drought. And there are provisions to develop, that the parties will develop a drought plan. But people should know that 92 and 94 are the 2 years where that allocation has some exposure. So we have to get together with the other parties. We think this plan puts us in a position, instead of the Klamath project being the first in line in the water shortage, that we're now last in line in water shortage. But in those years, there is some exposure, and there's going to be limited inflow in those kind of years. The plan does say that in those kind of years, if there is losses to the project, if we're not getting our allocation, that those losses would be compensated. The one thing that I should have said earlier, and I hope that folks understand, it's really a fundamental shift in the way things are done. And other parties can give their perspective on this a little bit later, but what I want to tell you is that the way it works now is we're essentially last in line every year. The lake has minimum lake levels, the river has minimum flow requirements, and if there's water left over, we irrigate, and we pump the aquifer, and we have a water bank. What this sets up is a situation where our allocation is coming off the top. We get our allocation first, and the river and the lake are taking what is left, which, again, those parties that are concerned about those issues, they're doing the same thing too. Some of the years that's going to really benefit. Some of the years the restoration activity, the reintroduction, all these things are a benefit to them. So for us, we're taking the water first, we're getting that allocation, and we believe it's pretty secure. Adjudication, Paul's going to talk more a little bit about this, but what this settlement does is it settles our claims with the Klamath Tribes and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, with the Klamath Project. We're settling. We're saying we're not going to spend money and go down these roads. We're going to come to an agreement, and we're going to live within our allocation. It does not prejudice any other party's claim or right to due process. For example, the Upper Basin contestants, those folks that are contesting the project's water rights, that will continue if they so choose, unless they withdraw. And the settlement creates a process, which is the new, it's Section 16, creates a process where other adjudication conflicts could be resolved. Doesn't mean they will, but there's a window of opportunity to do it. Okay. Again, quickly, there's a section on refuges. What the document says is that the parties that signed the agreement agree to support continued lease land farming on Tule Lake and the Lower Klamath refuges. The agreement provides a similar allocation curve for the refuge as ours, and it's a secure allocation to the refuge. It's water that they can count on. Refuges and fish and wildlife are added to the purposes of the Klamath Project. The proviso there is that there can be no adverse impacts to project irrigators as a result of that. What that does do, though, is allows us, when you talk about reimbursability, costs that are accrued in the project, it does allow us to help maybe spread out some of those costs, because right now those costs are borne by the project irrigators. And another example is the refuges pay their share on the power costs. Particularly, this is with respect to D plant, which moves water from Tule to Lower Klamath. Right now, the cost of running that pumping plant is borne by individual farmers. Okay. Leaseland revenues that are collected over the last several decades will satisfy the current project debt. And I put debt in parentheses because several of my board members don't like that term. They like the term reclamation debt better, but what this is an unknown. It's something that's out there, and Paul will tell you it is purely an accounting issue, but it's very difficult to explain. It's a potential liability, but there's no mechanism in place where reclamation can force irrigation districts to pay it, but it is a big problem. I know a lot of you have looked at this and been concerned about this issue for a lot of years, and what this does is it says, look, we don't know what it is, reclamation doesn't know exactly what it is, it's money that goes to the Treasury and kind of disappears at this point in time, so we're just going to say the lease line revenues satisfy whatever it is. It allows for future revenues coming off of those lease lands to go to capital improvements on the Klamath Project. When I started here, I actually thought that's the way it worked anyway. I thought that that's where those funds, any lease revenues, would come back and help pay for improvements to the project. The fact is, I don't think that's the way it works. Right now, I think when the counties get their payment in lieu, I think the net revenues go back to the U.S. Treasury and disappear. I don't know how else to say it, but what this does is say, no, from now on, that money's going to come back into the Klamath Project. This proposed settlement maintains the walking wetlands program, supports it, as well as other wildlife and agricultural partnerships. And I believe that overall the settlement has a lot of language in it and is a pretty nice thing to point to about the importance of privately managed lands to wildlife. Okay. Regulatory assurances, I'm going to also defer that to Paul a little bit later. Okay, power. So essentially it's kind of it's a three-part program. It's hard to talk about this without talking about 50 or 100 years of history, but I'll spare you that. I think most of you probably know it. What we've said is we wanted to have a target, an objective in this settlement to hold our costs somewhere around 3 cents a kilowatt hour. The benefits of the power program, the overall program, in my opinion, will apply to both on and off project irrigators. That was the intent when we were figuring out the resources that would be needed, and I think it still says that in the document. Go ahead. So the first part is an interim power fund. Essentially this tries to hold costs at about 3 cents. Right now in California and Oregon there are two different sets of ramp-ups or phase-ins on the power. This will, right now I think California irrigators are about 4 cents. I'm not sure, Oregon's 2, I think, close to 2. So the immediate benefit of this is going to benefit California producers, but again, there's a couple years there while we're building the rest of this program that it will benefit Oregon and California. An allocation of what is called reserve power from the Columbia River system. And without getting into a whole bunch of detail, what I'm going to tell you about this is we've worked hard with the federal government and with reclamation about whose responsibility is what. We've tried to get to a place where we think it's equitable and keeps agriculture viable in the project. Pumping water is really important, as all of you know. And there's a heck of a lot of it that goes on here, and this project was designed around it. So what we've done here is we're saying, and this would require federal legislation, but it would essentially allocate a piece of power from the Columbia system, a very small sliver of power from the Columbia system, that would be delivered to Malin or Captain Jack substation. It would be the responsibility of the Department of Interior, Mr. Thompson, to get that to the Captain Jack substation. And from that point, we would have to enter into some agreement with Pacificor, a wheeling contract or something, to get that power from Malin or Captain Jack to specified loads. When you talk about federal pumping, this is not for on-farm irrigation. It's for moving the water through the system. It's for D-plant. It's for the straight drain pumps. And it's, again, we're going to define what that is in the legislation, but, we're going to try to get pumps that move water, not pumps that apply water to the land. For those pumps, for individual on-farm pumps, we've designed a program, or actually people a lot smarter than me have designed a program that takes $33 million of resources from this settlement, and it allows us, again, a lot of work coming up here if this goes forward, but it allows irrigators to identify programs, hire some people that know the power business, and leverage that money with state and federal tax incentives, which are incredibly attractive. And that $33 million, when you find partners who have a tax appetite and you can market those tax credits, that turns out $33 million into $66 million, or actually closer to $100 million if you do it right. And so that's the genesis of that program. You would go out, you would do some efficiency locally, you would do whatever you can renewably, whether it's wind or solar, geothermal locally, but probably a lot of what you're doing is investing in bigger projects or bigger conservation efforts somewhere else in the Northwest. And I'm just going to, I know there's a lot of questions about that, but for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it there right now. There's a counties program, which again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. But the intent, I think, is that Klamath, Siskiyou, and Humboldt were the three counties involved. Whatever the outcome with the dams are, that's what this program is designed to do, is to mitigate any impacts there, and there's some funding for economic development. It's a tribal program, which includes fisheries restoration, conservation, funding for long-term economic development for the tribes, and 2/3 of the funding for the Mazama Economic Development Project, which is the 90,000 acres of private land in Klamath County. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I don't know if Ed Bear's around, but if y'all know Ed Bear, you should talk to him about this. What we're envisioning and what is underway is that the irrigation districts would form some kind of a partnership, kind of a business partnership called the Klamath Water and Power Agency. This would be the entity that would take, for example, the funding for the water plan, probably the power plan, and would do the studies, figure out how to make that money go as far as possible and on both water and power. It's an intergovernmental agency. Go to the next slide, Paul. No, I don't have it in there. Under Oregon law, it's an intergovernmental agency. Under California law, it's a joint powers authority, but it allows public entities like irrigation districts to enter into agreements or form partnerships with counties, with states, with cities, and also to enter into contracts with private landowners, for example. If off-project irrigators want to be involved as far as the power goes, there's mechanisms that can be used to include them. The settlement has a governance section. It forms the Klamath Basin Coordinating Council, which essentially is the parties that have been, or the parties that will sign the settlement. There's a technical team as part of that, and it creates an internal dispute resolution process. Okay, Paul. There's a lot of other things going on, and what you read a lot about is the negotiations or the separate deal that has to occur with Pacificor, and I'm here to tell you that we've all known that, and it's important, and what I've said publicly and what I will continue to say is that this cannot be something that is a bad deal for Pacificor or a bad deal for their ratepayers. They're a stakeholder in the basin like the rest of us, so their needs need to be met as well. But like the rest of us who are stakeholders, they have some responsibility here in the basin as well. So that process is ongoing and will continue. There will be legislation probably in both states and federally as a result of this. There's a FERC process that is ongoing, and the implementation of this plan, should it be accepted, it's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of elements that will take many years to get going. So I just tried to put here some of the key points and some of the things that I know are on people's minds. Dam removal is a part of this package. 30,000 acre-feet of water rights retired in the upper basin is part of this package. Less water than what we have claimed and what we need in many years. The ESA does not go away, but again, I want Paul to touch on the protections that we think we've got. There is always a threat of outside litigation. We think we have done a good job in this plan of minimizing that and improving ourselves against any outside attack. The Klamath tribes, as part of this deal, will get an opportunity for economic development on the Mazama project. Again, I want to say that I represent the Klamath water users who represent districts in the Klamath project, and our perception, our feeling with this plan is that it does secure us a supply of water. The project diversion happens first, funding to live within the allocation. The regulatory assurances, which Paul will talk about, what I will say is they are not 100% bulletproof. They're not. The ESA is still the law of the land, but I will say that I think they're 100% better than what we have right now in the Klamath project. Power, the national media focus I talked about earlier, I just don't think you can put a value on that, but it's big. I see it every single day. And I think this settlement has the opportunity to change that. This settlement is about support for ag and wildlife, not one or the other. Support for leaseland farming, the project debt, revenues coming back to infrastructure in the Klamath project. Adjudication costs for project irrigators are certainly the potential to be decreased significantly and potentially eliminated. And I just think personally, for stability in a pretty unknown future, this program deals with a lot of those things. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to give it to Paul, but I felt compelled to put one quote in here first. Toby, I'm sorry. I warned you it was coming. I know, Toby didn't say it, thank you. It's good they can get on the same page, but it's easy to do that when you're not making the hard choices. That is the quote of the year as far as I'm concerned, because this process, we say 2.5 years, I say 3 years is closer to what we've all been doing. And if it was easy, we would have been doing this a long time ago. And if it was easy, you all wouldn't be sitting here right now. So I'm going to let Paul go through some of the other stuff that's in circulation and talk about a couple issues.